So when I first got the opportunity, I knew I was going to do this service. I told my wife what I was thinking of doing my sermon about, and she told me, they're not going to ask you back. I was in the shower one day, and that song came to me, and I thought, I could do a sermon about that. So here we go. I was at a school function one night. It was one of those back-to-school nights where the parents and the kids come so you can meet the teachers and everybody gets to know each other. And I was explaining to them about my eyesight. I have this condition called retinitis pigmentosa. And what RP does, it means my retina is never fully developed. So where you guys might see something in high definition, I essentially am looking at that old 8mm film that's been down in your grandma's basement and damp, and it's all kind of crackly and fuzzy and popping all the time. So that's my eyesight. And I'm explaining this to the kids, and then they're about to go on to the next class, and a parent comes up to me and he says, "Oh, hi, I work at Wilmer Eye Institute." And I know RP, and I thought, well, this is great. I mean, we can work out some kind of treatment for grade exchange. Literally, the second thing the guy says to me is, "Do you know your eyesight's going to decrease by 50% every 7 years?" Wow, dude, thanks. Nice to meet you. But, I started doing the math, and I was thinking, okay, in 21 years, I'm going to see roughly 12.5% of that really crappy 8mm film that I'm looking at right now. My world is getting both literally and metaphorically darker. And things that I love, like reading or going to the movies, are going to be forced out of my life. It's a scary thing. And it's hard to think about this future that I have without succumbing to some kind of depression, And I think when I first realized this, before this guy talked to me, when I first realized the nature of my eyesight, it was very hard to think about that without feeling angry and bitter and depressed. But the odd thing is I found some hope in a 20-year-old rap song, which you've just heard. In 1992, Ice Cube released his third solo album, The Predator. Now, Cube is notorious for being a founding member of NWA, the innovative gangsta rap crew that wrote the song F the Police, and his solo work wasn't happier. His first album was America's Most Wanted, his second album was Death Certificate, and the cover of that had Uncle Sam with an American flag draped over him and a little toe tag because he'd been killed. So Ice Cube was not a happy person. And this album came out 6 months after the Los Angeles riots that greeted the acquittal of the officers involved in the Rodney King beating. And not surprisingly, it's a violent, angry expression of escalating racial tensions in a world already rife with gang violence, poverty, and other social ills. 15 of the 16 tracks on the official release were unmistakably brutal and full of despair. A mood that reflected life in South Central LA in those days just after the riots, but with enough anger and bitterness to appeal not only to Angelenos enraged by the King verdict, but also to a young man going blind slowly, thousands of miles and 2 decades removed from the album. And then 7 tracks in, there's It Was a Good Day. In the midst of all the violence and despair, Ice Cube found a reason to be thankful. And as you heard, the first lines are, "Just waking up in the morning, gotta thank God. I don't know, but today seems kind of odd. No barking from the dog, no smog, and Mama cooked a breakfast with no hog." Now, on this particular day, Cube doesn't get carjacked. He plays basketball and dominoes. The police don't harass him. There's a late-night romantic rendezvous with a girl he knew in high school. There are no murders in the neighborhood. Even Ice Cube, who on the previous song was threatening violent retribution for King's beating, can now get through a 24-hour period without using his AK-47. It's the little things. Now, I'm fairly certain this is not the standard we use to judge our own days, I hope. You know, a good day is, after all, relative, and I tend to judge my own daily success by whether I have time to write a few pages or read a chapter in a book I like, or whether my kids spend the afternoon screaming and littering the floor with Legos that are going to find the way to the sole of my feet later on. And let's see. Sorry, I lost my place. But listening to The Predator does offer me some perspective on my own life. I have it pretty good, all things considered. I'm not worried about living all the way until tomorrow. But I'm lucky. For large swaths of our country, for the 42 million Americans living below the poverty line, and for the 11 million undocumented immigrants, and for those people living in what Bukowski called the most dangerous part of town, where drugs and gangs are a day-to-day reality, it can feel like a triumph just to get through the day. Just to get through the day without fear and pain encroaching. For those paying attention, the newspaper is full of horrors. The world is full of cruelty, and it is overwhelming. So how do we reconcile that to our own lives? The French-Algerian philosopher Albert Camus once noted, "The human heart has a tiresome tendency to label as fate only what crushes it. But happiness, likewise, is in its way without reason, since it is inevitable." Happiness is inevitable. What a marvelous notion that is. This idea that happiness will come to us. We labor through the dark times in life, the dull times, the depressing times, like Bukowski was talking about, certain that we've played out our string, that the darkness is permanent, but happiness will come. Well, sure, you say, Camus is right, there will be happiness. But, my struggles are monumental. The things that are problematic in my life are so huge. And those moments of joy are fleeting. Of course they are. Look at Ice Cube. Los Angeles was teetering on the brink of racially tinged violence. Riots had just swept the city. But there's no smog. And the dog didn't wake him up. Those small victories are not equal to the tremendous horrors surrounding him. But they're a start, a brief moment when he can actually see the positive. And it builds. One good thing leads to another, and before the third verse is out, he's actually made it into the early morning hours of the next day. And things are still going well. Small, inconsequential moments of joy add up. And they become a ladder that can help us climb out of misery and into peace. Charles Bukowski found himself driving through the wrong side of town, but he had Mozart on the radio, and he felt wonderful ever so briefly. Ice Cube, who was writing from the perspective of someone actually living in that part of town, had his spirits lifted by a good game of basketball. They were able to receive joy in spite of the circumstances. We back our cars out into life itself, and we drive along betting on another day because of that. The odds are in our favor. Happiness is inevitable if we're open to it. Cube's good day was such a rarity. In fact, recently a blogger used clues from the song about the Lakers beating the Supersonics and there being no smog and watching UMTV Raps to determine the actual day that the song was about. He finally narrowed it down to January 20th, 1992, and he proclaimed this, the 20th of January, to be National Good Day Day. Now, I know we're a little bit past that, but you have time to mark that on your calendar and celebrate it appropriately, probably with a game of dominoes. You might wonder why I'm spending so much time talking about this particular song. It was, after all, a one-off on an album of violence and rage, ideas which dominated Cube's early career. But It Was a Good Day has persisted where other songs of that era have diminished. It has become the signature song of his solo albums. There's a reason for that. There's a resonance that goes beyond the fury of his other music. No bloggers are digging through the lyrics of the Predator's other tracks looking for clues as to the literal meaning of those songs. We all need hope and happiness, and we know that it has more staying power than pain. That's why we talk about the good old days, even though, objectively speaking, the good old days were just as miserable as the bad present days. It's just that those horrors fade in the rearview mirror while the joy is still visible. This is not to say that sadness is not also inevitable. As Jane Kenyon noted, it might have been otherwise, and someday it will be otherwise. Everything is impermanent. But we can overcome any sadness by living in this moment and accepting the world around us for what it is. Through that acceptance, we can find peace. The chalice to my right was donated to the church in early May, and I was sitting somewhere in the third row or so, and with my eyesight, I could never really see the chalice, and I was trying to stare extra hard at it because Claire was making a big deal about it being a new chalice and being really pretty. And so I'm squinting at it, and as my eyelashes started to cross each other, and I got just a little bit more shade and contrast, which is really good for my retinitis pigmentosa, I could actually see the flame. Now, this was the first time that I had seen the flame on the chalice. I'd been sitting there in that third row, watching Joyce Duncan light the chalice for months and months, and I'd never actually seen the flame. And there I did. Through that darkness, through the contrast provided by the darkness, I was actually able to get a moment of clarity. Now, it's the funny thing about those little instants of transcendence. Once you become open to them, they tend to happen more often. Soon enough, the inevitable has arrived, and you realize that you are really and truly happy. And now we're going to sing a hymn, because nothing makes us happier than music, really. Okay. This is hymn number 340.